Current events, new trends, and helpful products. Let's see what's in today's Cup of Poe.
Welcome to the Daily Cup of Poe. I'm your host, Cindy Poe, and as always, I appreciate you taking your time away to listen to what it is that I have to say. I know the value of time, and I will never take it for granted that you are choosing to share your time with me. So grab a cup or a mug of your favorite beverage, and let's get into today's cup with episode number 4. Still a very young podcast we have here, or a podcast as we like to call it. So I just want to start with a reminder to please go ahead and follow this podcast, and also go to justanamericangirl.com. That is my blog site, and subscribe there with your email to receive weekly updates. Now, my promise to you is to never send more than one email a week. No one needs to hear from anyone in their email box every single day, just once a week, just a way to stay in touch, not to invade your life. Now, as always, all of the links that we discuss in this podcast will be found in the show notes, so be sure to check that out. So let's get going. So today is kind of a somber day here as I was writing up my notes for today's show, because I really want to address this terrible and unfortunate milestone that we are quickly approaching. Well, I don't even want to say quickly approaching, but that we are approaching here in the U.S., and that is in regards to the COVID-19 death toll here in the U.S. We are approaching that 100,000 total deaths here. We're very close to it. I think today we were at 90, just over 99,000 deaths right now. So, and I just want to note that I live in the UK. I'm an American, but I reside in the UK right now, and the death rate based on population percentage is much higher here than in the US. Like if you base the deaths, like here in the UK, we have almost 37,000 deaths. But when you compare that to the 99,000 plus deaths in the US, when you compare that by population, the percentage here in the UK is a 0.055, and in the US a 0.029 when you base it on total population. So I just like to point that out, because the reason I want to point that out is because so often, especially when you're listening to the mainstream media, or the lamestream media as I always call it, you hear these numbers that they're putting out, and they can be very deceiving. Like when they say that we have, the most, the highest death toll. First of all, you have to assume that every country is rating or claiming the deaths the same way. And we know for a fact that there's no way that we can guarantee that the numbers from China are actually true numbers. I think Jesus himself would have to come to me and tell me that they were true numbers for me to believe it, because at this point, I don't know why we would believe anything that China has to say. They're certainly going to cover, their butts in any way that they need to. So I'm not believing their numbers. But even in other countries, there are different ways that they are claiming the deaths. And so I think that that's really important to know. I have a video that I'm just going to share with you really quickly from a director of health, talking about how they actually determine the deaths, or how they count the deaths. So I just want to share this video with you really fast. It's very short.
Be clear in terms of the definition of people dying of COVID. So the case definition is very simplistic. It means at the time of death, it was a COVID positive diagnosis. So that means that if you were in hospice and had already been given, a few weeks to live, and then you also were found to have COVID, that would be counted as a COVID death. It means that if technically, even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death. So everyone who's listed as a COVID death doesn't mean that that was the cause of the death, but they had COVID at the time of death. I hope that's helpful.
And I have to say that after listening to that particular video, and there were so many more, that was just the most concise definition that I found through all the videos, because if you look for it, there are tons and tons of these videos. And I know that Candace Owens just did an entire search everywhere, listening to health administrators talk about the definition of a COVID death and how they are counting these numbers. So you can see how here in the US, our numbers may not even be particularly accurate, because as far as I'm concerned, as she described it, somebody who is in hospice and dies, and they happen to, they already were in hospice and then they just happen to contract COVID, perhaps maybe, we know in the elder care facilities, they were having problems where they were putting COVID patients back into the facilities. But ever how it happens, they're still counting that as a COVID death. And I find that interesting. So the numbers to me need to really be taken with a grain of salt. But the reason I point out the difference in here, the UK and in the US, is when you compare it by population, it does make a big, huge difference. And to that point, we can talk about the states and how that breaks down as well. But before we go off down that trail, we are approaching this 100,000 death mark in the US, and I do not want to minimize the sadness of anyone dying. I just want to note that, while I think that any death is sad, and we of course pray for the families of those who have been lost to this disease or any cause of death, we have to, as a country, look at all of the information, not just the numbers that the lamestream media is going to feed to you. I found it really interesting, ever since we hit the 90,000 mark with the COVID deaths, every single day I turn on, the NBC News or CBS, and every single one of them is like, oh, it's the doom and gloom of approaching that mark. They've been pushing this 100,000 death mark now in a very morbid way, like almost. What I mean by that is almost as if they're cheering for that number to get there. The minute that we get to the 100,001 person, I just can't imagine the joy that they're going to be exhuming by talking about hitting that number. And, that's really a sad thing to think about, that's how I see it. And I'm not alone. I hear so many very intelligent and articulate people talking about how the news is just really politicizing that number. And of course, this is all in the name of blaming President Trump for this. And, for those who immediately go to that place where you blame President Trump for the deaths caused by this virus, all I can think is you should just be ashamed of yourself, because there is only one direction that the finger of blame should be pointing in regards to any deaths caused by this virus, and that is in the direction of China. And that is just simply a fact. China, and in combination with what the World Health Organization failed to report or reported inaccurately or took their dear sweet time reporting, it's important to remember where this all started and whether by accident or whatever it was that happened, whatever road you want to go down in that belief, because nobody actually knows, people who are saying, oh, it's a conspiracy theory that this was made in a lab. We don't know that it wasn't made in a lab. There is no definite proof that has come out and said, oh, this was 100% positive There's been nothing positive, nothing exact, nothing that has been 100% proven about this virus. So you can't say that it wasn't made in a lab. You can't say that it was not released on purpose. You can't say that it was released on purpose, but you can't say that it wasn't, because you don't know. I mean, we have all this stuff in the background that we're never hearing anything about. All of the people who are working with the labs in Wuhan that are connected with the Harvard University and other important entities here in the States, that, all of this stuff is going on. So there's a big question mark around all of this. But if there is any blame, any finger of blame to be pointed, and you're not pointing it at China, then, you should just be ashamed of yourself. And that is just simply how I feel about that. All of those who actually have spent their energy defending China and worrying about people calling the virus the China virus or the Wuhan virus. My particular favorite is the CCP virus, because that works on many, many levels with this. But all of you who were so concerned about, the racist undertone, which is absolutely ridiculous, you need to grow a backbone and you need to check yourselves. Because if you think that China is our friend and that they aren't, that they're caring about even their own people, they aren't caring about their own people. So you can bet your bottom dollar they're not caring about you. They're not caring about Americans. They're not worried about telling us the truth. They couldn't care less, about telling you the truth. They're all about covering up and taking care of themselves. But it's moments like this that the TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, is so obvious. And it's really obvious with the media. When you see the direction in which they start pointing fingers, the way that they ask questions, ridiculous questions, how can you call, what your task force is doing a success when you have 90,000 deaths on your hand, you have blood on your hand, President Trump. That is so ridiculous. And that is so obviously just Trump derangement syndrome at its best. And I guarantee you, if there was a Hillary Clinton in office or Barack Obama, I actually went back and watched the briefings when President Obama was in office and we had the H1N1 virus. He gave his little read off speech, talked about what an awesome job his task force was doing and that things were going to be just fine. And then he turned around and walked away, and the media didn't even try to shout questions at him. It was just a given that, that's what we're going to report and that's it. But here with President Trump, because we have to hate Trump at all costs and we can't report anything good, they can't talk about the awesome things that the task force has done, the way that they have laid out plans for the states to be able to handle this, because let's not forget that we do not live in a dictatorship here in the United States. States are run individually. They have their own governments. They have governors. Each city has their own mayors. The states have their own Senate and House. They have their ways of making their rules. And so whereas the federal government can set up guidelines and they can get emergency money sent to you and help out with these things, it's still up to the states to make decisions. And that's what we have to remember in this republic, is that we are 50 individual states. And whereas the federal government is there to help us, especially in emergency situations, they are not there to completely govern each state all alike. And you can see the differences in the states, especially in an emergency like this, in an emergency where it's affecting the entire country. We can point a lot of fingers when you start looking at the death tolls, and especially now that we're starting to reopen many of the states, you'll see that the highest rate of infections are in, ironically, democratically run states. Now, do I think that's because the Democrats are causing the virus? No. It's all about what those states and the people who live in those states and what that usually represents. Obviously, people in South Dakota have a much smaller rate of infection because there's probably not a lot of people traveling to South Dakota, especially in the wintertime. I've been to South Dakota in the winter. It's quite harsh. It's tough to be there. So, there are lots of things around this, but you also have to, at some point, look at the management of those states and ask questions of those governors and mayors of the big cities. I mean, we are at over 99,000, almost at 100,000 deaths right now. 1/4 of those deaths are in the state of New York alone. And of that 1/4 of the amount of deaths, 70% of those deaths are in New York City alone. So that's a huge hunk of the death rate, just pinpointed in one particular area. So we have to ask ourselves, what happened in the state of New York that was so different from everyone else? We have to look at the population, the population of the state, look at the percentages. But that's to have a fourth of the total number of deaths in one state is quite telling, I think. So if we're going to start looking into where problems lie, you got to look at those states that have the really high deaths, and then you listen to Governor Cuomo, who just ridiculously started blaming the CDC for the fact that he required nursing homes to bring in COVID-19 positive patients back into nursing homes with patients with nursing home residents who did not have COVID-19. And we know that particular group are very vulnerable to this disease, and yet the state had no problem mandating that happened. And they're trying to blame the CDC, but at the end of the day, it's their situation. It's just like in Pennsylvania when Dr. Levin, telling everyone, oh, it's no problem having your family members in these care facilities. They're perfectly safe. And they're having a very high death rate in these facilities. But note that Dr. Levin took her mother out of her care facility and put her in a hotel during all of this, and didn't bother to share that with everyone, saying, well, you know what, you guys can do whatever you want to do. Personally, I'm going to feel a little safer if I move my mother into another facility. The one thing about this crisis that I hope everyone will remember is what it is telling us about all of our public officials and what really truly is important to them, and where their mindset is. And, there is absolutely no reason that Governor Cuomo should point a finger at the CDC. You can make an intelligent decision for your state. Other states did. So, you just have to look at the decisions they're making. And when you start looking at their decisions that they're making, it's easy to see where their mindset is and what they find is important. I mean, I'm going to go back to, everyone blaming the president. President Trump was very quick to react when finally was told by China and the World Health Organization that there was person to person, the ability to contract it person to person, and that this could be a serious matter. It was important to note that that's when Trump put this travel ban. He was very quick to do that. While he was doing that, he was being opposed not just by Democrats, which that's a given. Whenever he's going to do anything, it's whatever Trump does is racist in the minds of Democrats. So of course they're going to oppose him, but even by members of the Republican Party, they were even opposing it and didn't want him to put that ban on, but he did it anyway. And we now know, whether you want to believe it or not, help slow this. But here's the other unfortunate thing. While he's doing that, you have everyone during the Chinese New Year, in New York City and in California. And, they're encouraging everyone, don't let this coronavirus is only the flu. Don't let the racist president scare you off from coming down here and hanging out in Chinatown. And I'm not saying that anyone in a Chinatown is responsible for this virus. But let's face it, Chinese New Year, a lot of people are traveling back to China, or a lot of people are visiting family or just going for fun to visit there and coming back to the cities. And this is a major disease that is very contagious, and you're encouraging people to come and hang out in big giant groups down in Chinatown. And not only that, President Trump addressed the whole coronavirus when nobody wanted to really talk about it. Impeachment was going on. And don't forget that impeachment was like the number one thing on Nancy Pelosi's brain during this whole thing. She wasn't worried about a coronavirus. Impeachment was going on, and President Trump had the State of the Union, and he spoke about the task force and all the things they were doing to try to make sure that he and his administration protected Americans. And all the, after giving that speech, that very patriotic and very pro-America speech, Nancy Pelosi stands up behind him and tears it up. She tore up the speech in which he said that his task force is working really hard to find out everything they can about this virus and to protect everyone. And she just tore that speech up. So you have to look at where people's priorities are, and it's really easy to find them if you look directly at all of their actions and what they're doing. So I hope that will be part of what will come out of this unfortunate crisis. And it is unfortunate, but I hope that we'll also be able to get some real numbers out of this as well. Like I said, looking into briefings from all across the country, states all across the country, listening to the health department experts talk about how they are determining COVID deaths, listening to doctors who are on YouTube making videos talking about how they're being told to mark down deaths as COVID deaths that they would have never considered calling it a COVID death. That's, really makes you really think. And then when you start looking at the numbers from this going back through the end of a flu season, we have to look at our flu numbers. Well, are our flu numbers really low? Because if our flu numbers are really low, maybe there's something there too. That's just all part of what, I think about when we start talking about the coronavirus deaths, and we get to these death tolls, and the way the news media just wants to seem to rejoice in the fact that under President Trump, 100,000 people will have died from a pandemic that had nothing to do with him. And you can say, well, it's his response. But his response, what would you say he should have done differently? Are you going to say that, the lame excuse of, well, there was a task force at the CDC? Well, we've researched and discovered that was just bogus. There was nothing there. That was like a few sheets of paper in a notebook. And he has now, for the next crisis that comes up, his administration has written and developed an amazing plan and been able to build up stockpiles for all of the states. There is no excuse for any state to have any issue with any kind of infectious disease that they can't handle now. So, and now we're even turning around where states are starting to open, and we're starting to ease up a little bit, and we're doing this in a really smart way. The leadership that he showed with stepping up and saying churches are essential. Here's how you can open. Everybody talked about, people shouldn't be going to church. That's a terrible advice. But did anybody bother reading the guidelines that he set forth for churches? That his administration, that his task force set forth for churches? I guarantee you churches are the safest place. They're way safer than the Walmart that you're going to, with everybody wearing fake masks. And that's what I'm going to call these masks. I've been looking through videos and pictures of people with these homemade masks and stuff. It's just utterly ridiculous. You think you're so safe. It's like this false sense, of safe. I promise you, you're way safer in the churches that are opening than going to your local Walmart, which actually I think you're safe either way, because as we now know, the CDC has changed their mind once again on the amount of spreading this disease has on surfaces. We now know that is a lot less of a problem. I heard this from someone, and I thought this was so smart. In 5 years, there's going to be a big documentary written about all the ridiculousness that happened in this time. I can remember when Ebola, all of the big scare of Ebola, just a few years back, and everybody's like panicking, and the media and the president, it's nothing to worry about. Let's keep it calm. And turned out that it was perfectly fine, because you know what? We have fantastic doctors. We have a fantastic healthcare system here, regardless of what media and Democrats want to tell you. We have the best of doctors and scientists. So we're getting things done really well here. And that is something that we can be very, very proud of. And I do think it is time to open up the country. So as we approach this very somber and solemn moment of hitting that terrible mark of 100,000 deaths, let's always keep people in our prayers, no matter what the cause is of someone leaving this earth earlier than they're supposed to. Death is sad, and we never want to make light of that. But I want to encourage everyone to also not politicize it. There's no reason to rejoice and be happy that finally you have a benchmark that you can use to make the president, because you don't like him, you can make him look bad. Because of this, because that's just gross. That is just gross and unacceptable. And I want you to be better than that. So as we're moving forward and as the country is opening up, I encourage everyone to wash your hands, stay out of people's personal spaces. There's nothing wrong with that. I hope that sticks. If washing your hands and staying out of people's personal space, I hope those actions will stick and will continue to with that. But just remember that we live in the greatest country in the world, and no matter how wonderful things look in other countries, you don't really know what it is unless you live there. And there's good and bad in everything. And just realize how lucky you are to live in the States, and how really fortunate we are that we have a president who truly loves America and is working for Americans. And I truly believe that, and happy every day to wake up knowing that Donald Trump is our president, and that he is doing his very best for all of us. So on that note, I'm going to remind you to please subscribe to this podcast, and also go to justanamericangirl.com. That's where my blog lives. And sign up there with your email, and to get that one email a week. I promise, pinky promise, there will only be one email a week, just to keep you updated with what's going on. And also below, you're going to find a link for the Trump 2020 link. The link for the Trump 2020 app. It's an app that you can download onto your phone, and there's all these really amazing shows. There is The Right View, which with Laura Trump and some other really smart, brave, bold women speaking on that show, and Triggered with Don Jr. and a lot of other things. But you're also going to get a lot of updates with what's going on. I'm also in these notes going to put the link to whitehouse.org. I always encourage you to go and look at what is being posted there daily. They post pretty much daily. It's very rare that they don't post some update with what is happening at the White House, what is being signed, what's being looked at, what's happening, because, we can't rely on the news to tell us all the stuff. They will certainly tell you anything bad, and they'll twist anything good into something bad. So I always suggest that you go and look for yourself. So whitehouse.gov is a really great spot to go and see all the truth about what is happening with our government. And also, finally, there is a link in the bottom for you to be able to donate to the Republican Party to help us win the presidency, as well as the Senate and House seats. I have a team, Ride the Red Wave 2020. That's my donation team, and that all goes directly to the Republican National Party. And I have specified specific candidates that I support, because even in the Republican Party, I do not support every single candidate. With primaries coming up, I'm hoping that a few are going to be replaced. So we're looking at that. But on my link there for the donation for the Republican Party, I encourage you, if you have $10 or $20 that you can spare, every little bit is going to help, because we can't rely on the media to be fair. We have to have a little bit of money in this game to be able to get the word out best we can. So I appreciate anything that you guys can do. So as always, I am going to leave you with Mama Po's invitation to be fearless, be gracious, be authentic. Peace out, everybody.